Hello. The story we're going to tell you is from the book Fionn and the Legend of the Blood Emeralds by Tom O'Neill.
Hi, I'm Darren Yorke, and I'm going to be reading you the parts about Dark Micheál. Dark is in a terrifying race to find a cure for the mystery illness that's killing his uncle. As his courage and friends start to fail him, he crosses into the ancient realm of Fionn Micheál.
And I'm Micheál Gruagáin. I'll take you into that heroic realm where a young man called Matha finds himself on a parallel quest. Sometimes alone and sometimes in the company of warriors, Matha runs into bewitched cats, angry ghosts, and unhelpful herons. Travel with us, and you will soon see the meaning of the words spoken by Dark's uncle. They walk among us.
The book itself has a glossary which helps with explaining words and names. It also has footnotes and images of some of the characters. You can get it on heroicrealm.com or on Amazon.
Now, why don't you settle into a cosy chair and let us tell you about the strange occurrences that started recently in the Kill Bog.
Chapter 1. Buried Trove. The trouble started that day in the Kill Bog, 5 miles east of Mullet Town, a place that appears on no map. There were 3 people carefully picking their way across the spongy surface, steering well clear of the rat. A laugh came from one of them, Connie McLean, a large man with a wild black beard. It echoed across the valley. He had been driving a metal spike into the soggy ground at various places. Now he was convinced he had hit something, because the spike had stopped about a metre down. He tapped it a couple more times with his lump hammer. Dark McLean, nearly as tall as Connie, even though he was only 15, stood beside him, listening for the cavernous sound he knew his uncle hoped to elicit from beneath their feet. Dark was shaking his head. He didn't want to hear that sound. Dark's friend, Kevin Dowd, short and clearly in some discomfort, didn't care at all what kind of sound the spike made. He was only visiting, and dragging his Wellington boots through a marsh for 2 days had not been part of the deal. If you don't mind my asking, what exactly are you expecting to find? It was a fair question. A missing stone, said Connie, vaguely, not doing anything to allay Kevin's obvious fear that he was being implicated in an illegal act of some sort. Not such an unreasonable fear. After all, it was known that Dark's uncle had done time. Connie suddenly shouted, as if for the benefit of eavesdroppers, "There will be great disruptions if the people who wander this route at dusk get sent astray because of the missing plinth." "What is he on about?" whispered Kevin to Dark. "The rumours about your uncle being stone mad seem pretty much on the money." Dark was inclined to reply that stone mad was quite right, but he kept quiet out of loyalty to his uncle. Connie was mad about rocks. Stone circles, standing stones, stones with markings so faint that no normal person would consider them markings at all, let alone OM codes. And most recently, this thing about the missing stone. They were looking for a standing stone that was no longer even standing. Dark himself was sceptical about Connie's secret theory about the missing stone. He knew that his uncle was not just looking for the missing megalith for his own sake. According to Connie, there had been a series of great standing stones along the once much travelled route west, running out past Rockchapel under the Mycrofilms hills. Back then, this raised bog was solid enough for people from other realms to build a dwelling on. When standing at one stone, you could see the next stone along. Now one stone was missing. The lake underneath came back and swallowed it. That no longer standing stone was just a marker. What he was really looking for was a chamber that had been built at the base of the formerly standing stone, in which some man, a friend of Connie's, had allegedly entombed his cherished possessions for safekeeping during the time of trouble. An awkward detail. The evening on which the friend had taken this precaution had been nearly 2,000 years ago. It was all supposed to remain a secret between Connie and Dark. No fear on that score. He would not be considered stone mad by Kevin or anyone else. Dark did not pay much attention to any of his uncle's ideas these days. He had decided that events that took place thousands of years ago were not relevant to his own life. Dark knew that Connie meant it literally when he said, "They walk among us." Dark didn't believe any of that. Not really. Not anymore. He didn't care to. He knew that none of his friends would listen for a minute to stories like that, so nor would he. "Anyway, what's that?" asked Kevin. "What?" "That thing you're holding in your fist." Dark opened it to show him a shard of brown pottery. "It's just broken crockery," said Kevin, examining it. "Why are you always collecting junk?" "It's not junk," said Dark. It was true that Dark collected things. His room was full of boxes and bags of stuff, and this was about the least remarkable thing that he'd found in a while. He had spotted it earlier in the mud next to a drainage trench at the side of the bog. It had once been a piece of cup or maybe a small bowl. Even Connie hadn't looked at it twice. Bric-a-brac. For a former archaeologist, the kinds of ancient things that interested him were surprisingly limited. Still, Dark was not able to throw his piece of bowl away. Later, with it buried in the inner pocket of his parka, he found himself still wondering who might have owned it. The kinds of ancient things that Connie definitely was interested in. Aside from stones, it was mainly weapons. Connie was convinced that the secret chamber contained weapons as well as other personal valuables which he would not specify. The reason he wanted to dig them up now was not to sell them or donate them to some museum. It was just that he was certain that their hiding place was in jeopardy. Someone, an unnamed someone, had returned to steal them. They had to be moved. Like the other hard, cold thing he had found before, relocated to a secret place that only Dark and he knew about. Dark still had to figure out how to explain those things away. A long-legged grey bird rose up slowly from the river beyond the rath and flapped along, surveying the water for the ripples and silver flashes of fish. Connie stood gazing at the heron. According to Connie, the finest but also the most fanciful of birds. The old people used to call her the Mycrofilms, or Long Mary. "And why do you go along with his delusions about standing stones or whatever?" asked Kevin, nodding at Connie. "I don't get it. You said we'd spend the holidays quad biking and stuff." He seemed to need reassurance about Dark's own grip on reality. "Right," said Dark. "Sorry. I'll make an excuse and we can head back to the house. We won't come out with him tomorrow." He shuddered. "What's wrong with you?" asked Kevin. "Don't know." Dark looked all around and then he knew. The evening sun was creating a long, thin shadow that reached down to the river from the middle of the grassy field on the far bank. The source of the shadow was a thin man, the only neighbour who never called into the Micheál household. Trevor Salty. His gold rings glinted as he lifted the unnecessary binoculars to inspect what they were doing. He was no more than 200 metres away. Salty lived in Greystone Manor, a dilapidated mansion just across the Brown River, surrounded by a rookery and walled gardens. Connie sometimes talked about the previous resident of that manor, an old man called Jack Curtis. Apparently not long after his nephew Salty had arrived, the old man had been found decomposing face down in a river. According to Connie, Jack Curtis was a gentle man. He had a kind ear for every person and spoke ill of no person. He spent his days at markets selling paintings of his dogs and 20-year-old pet cattle. He always said he had no living relatives. Dark took out his phone for some reason, thinking he ought to check the time, but the hours had gone missing from the display since entering the bog. It was 12 minutes and 13 seconds past nothing. "Who's that?" asked Kevin. Connie removed the spike hastily and made busy putting it down in another spot, right next to a quagmire. He shouted as if he'd found something there. His decoy was not very convincing. He had never been a good liar. "Just a neighbour," said Dark. "He doesn't worry me." "Why do you say that? Why would he worry you?" said Kevin. Dark was not a good liar either. Salty worried Dark a lot, but this had nothing to do with the local suspicions about the death of some old man he'd never known. Soon after he and his mother moved to here, Dark had met him in town. Salty stepped in front of him on the footpath, looking him up and down silently. Then he had said in a dancing voice, as if he were reciting a poem, "Well now, well now." What is he? A sissy? Flowing hair, rook black, long eyelashes over angry eyes. Spawn of Sean, it's true. How long will the soft, slender boy last, I wonder? Have they not told him? No McLean has a future in this place. The dancing voice stayed in Dark's head since that day. In the 4 years since then, Dark had got bigger and not afraid of most people, but he still crossed the street whenever he saw Salty. And Salty would still stare right through him. It made him scared and angry at the same time, but he wouldn't tell anyone. Not his mother, in case she went back to not coping very well. Not Connie, because of what Connie might do. If his uncle knew that Salty had spoken to him in that way about Sean, Dark's father, and about all the McLeans, especially Dark and Helen, there would be strong words and spilling anger. Salty would lose the battle, but he would win the war. Connie would end up in front of the same judge as before, and he'd be put away again. Then everything would fall apart. Dark shook himself. "In fact, you might know him," he said to Kevin, trying to sound casual. "As well as farming, he runs some businesses in town. You know Kaiser's Emporium?" Everyone in school knew the Emporium, as it was the only pub that accepted photoshopped IDs. "Okay, gotcha. Trove S," said Kevin. "He also runs the herbal shop, right?" "Yeah, some of the other lads told me about that." People at Mulla's community school talked about Trev's herbal shop. Since the head shops had been closed, it was the only place you could still get illegal high stuff. One Kelly fella in 6th year had caused a big fuss by going bonkers and attacking his mother with a tomahawk. His father had then gone bonkers trying to beat Salty with his walking stick. Salty had gone on local radio and laughed about it, saying the lad was not a customer, that nobody else had complained about his bath salts, and he could take the blame neither for bad parenting nor bad genes. Dark watched as Salty gave a slight nod. No sooner had he turned to walk away than there came a high-pitched yell from the other side of the bog, the McLean side. There stood a very short, stocky man. He had a large red afro that dwarfed his angry little head. Even though there was a harsh wind blowing from across the river, he wore only a t-shirt and Bermudas. He had white gloves up to his thick elbows. Kevin paled. His eyes widened and his mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Hey!" shrieked the short man in an even higher pitch. He pointed at Kevin. "What you gawking at, fool?" This was the Red, Connie's friend. Recently, for some reason that nobody asked, he decided to style himself on Mr. T. He was Connie's right-hand man, except when there was work to be done. Or if they were on the bog, which he was genuinely afraid of. "Beware of the bog," he shouted, clearly pleased by Kevin's fear of him. "One step wrong and she'll suck you to her cold, wet heart." "We've spent too much time here," said Connie, reading the situation with Kevin a day too late. "I'm sure you two have loads of other stuff you'd rather be doing." "What did Salty want?" asked Dark of Connie, as they walked ahead of Kevin. "What does he always want?" answered Connie. Dark knew Connie's answer to his rhetorical question. "The land and all that goes with it," recited Dark dryly. "Whatever he might imagine that to be. And now he thinks he's seen something. He thinks you've discovered something." "Right," said Connie. "But don't worry a bit about him." That was Connie's problem. He worried too little. According to Connie, worrying is voluntary. Anyone is free to decide against it. When they reached the edge of the bog, they stood with the Red for a minute looking back. Salty was gone. "Just remember," said the Red to Connie, "if you find any little old bit of red stone when you're scratching in them bad lands, give them to me. That's all I ask." And Connie laughed. "You don't believe they exist," said the Red. The Red had a theory that there were things he called red emeralds to be found in the Kill Bog. He wanted to get his hands on one, but not badly enough to overcome his fear of sinking. "No, I do not," said Connie, somehow unconvincingly. "I've told you often, there's no basis to that old tale." "What kind of red stones? What you talking about, fool?" The Red emitted a mirthless laugh. "We don't need no liars snuffing round in our business." The Red had not been introduced to Kevin. How he knew Kevin's father was the mullet solicitor was not clear. He expertly arced a spit 3 metres out onto a sundew leaf. Connie patted Kevin on the back reassuringly, almost knocking him into the ditch. "Pay no attention to that mouldy cur." As they walked through the 2 grass fields back to the house, Connie went ahead with the Red trotting beside him, cursing about something or other as usual. "It's not normally like this, you know," said Dark. "Tomorrow we can play racquetball in the empty silo." Kevin nodded. "And take out the quad bike, if you like." "Sounds like fun," said Kevin flatly. Dark decided it was not time to ask the main thing he wanted to ask. He wanted Kevin to talk to Kira about coming out to the farm so the 3 of them could get started on the band they'd still only talked about. At Connie's suggestion, Dark already had his drums and amps set up in the old barn. Connie claimed he had been in a band in college. Only a headbanger band, but still he was right about the acoustics in the barn. After he had helped Dark to clear and wire the place, Dark had to admit that the sound in the thick-walled cavern was pretty amazing. He had put some posters and his mum had donated the black leather sofa. He was planning for it to be a surprise for Kira and Kevin. He couldn't ask Kira directly about coming here. But Kevin grew up in the same street as her and was easy talking to her. He could pass on the message. Back at the farmyard, the Red climbed into the cab of his large orange truck, rolled down the window as the wheels were already spewing dust from the lane. "Later, fools!" As to where he was going in such a hurry, as usual no information was asked or offered. The other 3 were welcomed by the dogs as they entered the flagstone kitchen. The sheepdogs, Psycho and Georgina, stood against Connie's thighs, competing for his attention. The 2 red hens cawed casually as they walked out. Dark's whippet pumpkin went back to huddle next to the Aga. In the kitchen, Kevin said no thanks when Connie offered to make him one of his doorstep sandwiches he had always made for himself and Dark when Helen was away. Buttery and full of rashers, onion and tato. They were Dark's favourite snack. Kevin raised an eyebrow and said no offence when Connie came around again asking was he sure. Dark was stopped by a thought. He suddenly was starting to see his life as Kevin was seeing it. He went to the freezer in the back kitchen and took out a couple of 4 Seasons pizzas. "Me and Kevin will have these instead," he said to Connie. He slit the plastic off and put them on the top tray in the hot oven of the Aga. Connie went outside after eating 2 of the sandwiches and leaving the 3rd in the bread bin, where he knew Dark would come back for it later. As Dark took the pizzas out of the oven, he said, "Sometimes, you know, there's more to people than meets the eye." "What do you mean?" said Kevin, with a glance that was halfway between fear and pity. In his slightly annoying habit, he flicked his blonde fringe from over his eye. "I guess it must be really hard for you here sometimes. I mean, I give out about my old man being always on my case, but I suppose I wouldn't want it the other way either, with nobody giving much of a crap about what I do." "What?" said Dark, trying not to sound angry. "Nothing here is really hard." As they stood at the sink, rinsing plates and Coke glasses, Kevin sighed and said, "I think I'll go home tomorrow if that's okay, dude." Dark could bring himself to understand that too. After all, if he had had anyone to call to take him away from here in those early days, he too would have gone. The fact that there was now nowhere else he wanted to be would not have been any more comprehensible to his then self than it would be to the now Kevin. He would have been aghast if he could have foreseen that his school-leaving plan would be to find a job that would allow him to stay part-time farming with Connie. No. He had no reason to be sore with Kevin for wanting to go so soon. "No need to bother your dad," said Dark. "We'll drop you home. We go down to the town on Thursday mornings anyway." "Okay, thanks," said Kevin. "It's just that the internet connection is a bit laggy out here, that's all. I've been trying to run a debug on some Java code I've been working on." "No bother," said Dark. "I've been writing a time-stamped deck," Kevin continued, over-explaining as usual. Online, the only thing Kevin and Dark had in common was that neither updated his social profiles. Otherwise, their online activities were entirely different. Kevin's Java blog had guru status on certain 4chan boards. He rarely ventured elsewhere. Dark only ever took part in discussions to do with League of Heroes gameplays, so he was careful now to make no sound that would invite a full explanation of the deck situation. And a word of advice, Kevin continued, never knowing how to stop talking when he was feeling awkward. I guess you might have been thinking of inviting Kira out here to get the band started or whatever. I was not thinking that, said Dark, taken off guard. He didn't want to hear what Kevin was now about to say. No offence, Arthur, said Kevin. He always called him Arthur when he was giving him unwanted advice in his old man's voice, but I think it mightn't necessarily be the best way to impress her, if you know what I mean. Maybe we could all just meet in town. We could get a garage or something where we could start practicing. I mean, out here, where would we even set up gear? In the cowshed or something? Realistically, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's alright for me out here and all that, but for a girl like her, if she met Connie, or his friend, and saw... I mean, he was embarrassed now, having said much more than he had started out to say. I wasn't thinking that at all, Dark repeated casually. The slender image of Kira tiptoeing through his mind, leaving his house for a waiting car while the smile in her green eyes turned into a laugh. I have some jobs to do outside. Do you want to come? He only asked because he knew Kevin wouldn't come. His friend had already been edging towards the laptop. He would soon be immersed in his own logical realm, time-stamping its decks, while time in this world slipped away suitably unnoted. He would be brought back only by active interruption. Dark would not be interrupting him for a while. Outside he saw Connie head towards the road field with Psycho. Connie seemed to enjoy going on autopilot for the milking, like he became part of the machine. The cows would have his uncle's mind for a couple of hours, and his mum wouldn't be coming back for this evening, so she usually stayed with Dark's grandparents in the city when she had Wednesday afternoon lectures, so she said. That left him hanging loose. He didn't have any jobs to do. His calves had already been fed. The heavy clouds were bringing an early black night. He went to the hay shed and climbed to the top of the round bales. He sat there for a little while trying to think about things. There was something going on that he was uneasy about. Not to do with Kira, nor Kevin, nor Connie, nor even Salty, as far as he could figure out. When he coughed, a large stray cat that he had never seen before ran silent and white from the middle layer of the bales. His unease grew worse. He couldn't sit. He put his hands in the outer pockets of his parka. He didn't know why. He felt there was something there. All he found was the squished remnants of a Snickers. He thought that might settle him, but he licked the last of it off the paper. It did no good. He climbed down. It was like he had an itch beneath his skin. He needed to walk or run for a bit to settle. Every night sound was amplified in his head. He thought he heard his name called from down the field somewhere. He was sure of it, in fact. He looked towards the black blanketed expanse. His thinking turned to going for just a few hours. Maybe it would be a bit irresponsible to leave his friend alone, but even if Kevin noticed and got spooked, well, he would be leaving tomorrow anyway, so who cared? And his mum would never find out, so she'd be no worse off. It was not that he had forgotten his promise never to go back to the Rah at night. According to Connie, the Rah is a dangerous place. The professionals say that these were farm dwellings of ancient generations. The people's belief, however, is that it is the home of the Tuatha Danann, a banished people who have no reason to be hospitable to our kind. Bad things can befall the unwelcome intruder. But the thing with Dark was, he liked to do things his own way. He went into the kitchen. He could see the light of the laptop shining off the open bedroom door. "See you in a bit, Kev," he said, to make sure that Kevin was not listening out for him. A suitably disinterested "huh" came back. He took a slice of crumbled ham from the fridge. He opened the front door and used the ham to coax Georgina in from her nighttime circling of the yard. He got her to sit in the basket by the Aga with Pumpkin. This was to prevent her following them. The sight of the rat always made a fine mess of Georgina. She would lie down in the bog, whimpering like she was dying, and he would have to carry her home. To bring luck and comfort, he put on the warm Pixies hoodie that had been his dad's. His mum wasn't sure she liked him wearing it, and then his jacket. He checked he had his torch. He pulled the front door after him and he headed into the shadows. He knew the fields very well and did not need the torch for this part. He had crossed the 2 grass fields and was back in the bog before he had time to have a second's thought. He trod carefully towards the centre of the bog, making sure to widely skirt the quagmires. It wouldn't do to be phoning for help, as he was sucked in by the bog's cold, wet heart. The briars on the way into the Rah were massively overgrown. He was much bigger than the last time, less able to slip through without getting scratched all over. Inside was eerie blackness, the unnatural silence, not the normal noisy quiet of night. The middle was clear, the canopy overhead too thick for any plant to live underneath it. The ground was soft with desiccating oak leaves and poisonous yew needles. Dark sat with his back against the biggest tree. He waited. For what? Why was he here? He breathed shallowly through his nose so as not to break the soundlessness. Maybe that was precisely what he had come for, quiet, to banish the imaginings he had absorbed from living too long among superstitious country people, to prove the Rah was just an ordinary place, that it was no longer having any hold on him. He could be like his friends. All Dark really wanted was to be normal. Eventually he stood, brushing leaves from his pants. He patted his parka to check that his phone hadn't fallen from the inner pocket. As he felt the lining, the unease that had taken him here returned. When he stepped on a protruding root, there came a head-piercing shriek. His legs almost buckled. He counted to 50 very fast, his way of calming himself. He hadn't heard anything but an owl or maybe a vixen. He steadied himself only for it to come again. A howling, whining sound. It was from high in the branches of a yew tree. When he looked up, the voice broke into words. "Oh, and you think you can walk out just like that without a blessing or thank you? The bony Amadon thinks he will pay no price for his intrusion on the world of the good people. And it's quite good to hear your fine voice again too," Dark heard himself say. It didn't seem like the right time to deny that he knew the voice of the Far Jarrag, foul Puka, outcast of the world of the little people. With the silence broken, suspended conversations resumed all round him. There was rustling and whispering as the more friendly of the little kingdom emerged onto branches and resumed their evenings. Then the air quietened again. A warm draught of air brought another person, enormous and silent. The old man stepped into the open space, also refusing to stay locked away in Dark's past imaginings. Also a guest in the home of the little people. His grey hair flowed over his yellow and blue tunic. Following him was Canaan, almost as massive, but with his beard still black and bearing a dangerous grin. Next came a woman with long red hair. Immediately, a great fire sprung up and began to gather people of both sizes in around it. "Welcome to you, Avik," rumbled the old man. "What brings you here? What's troubling you?" "A lanky scrounger," shrieked the Far Jarrag, "a purple-faced abomination now walking perpendicularly down the trunk of a tree. He only comes to presume on the hospitality of decent people when his own don't want him." "Nothing," said Dark, truthfully ignoring the Puka. "Nothing troubling me except that I'm talking to trees." "Arthur, you came to us because you have something on your mind," said the old man, reaching out and placing a surprisingly soft hand on Dark's shoulder. He said to the others, "Bless us all, but look at the height of him. Hasn't your Arthur grown from a sapling to a fine young dare?" When the old man continued looking at him, waiting, Dark had more to say despite his best efforts to shut up, and he wasn't talking about Kevin going away without giving him a chance. He wasn't talking about how to shake Connie from his growing obsession with buried treasures. He wasn't even asking him how to stop Trevor Salty getting to him. Instead, he heard himself saying, "How long before I can hear someone speak about my father without getting my stomach in a knot?" "That, I am sorry to report, I cannot answer," said the old man, looking at him quietly. "It used to be because I couldn't get him out of my head," said Dark. He never discussed this with his mum or Connie. He could not understand why he was saying it out loud in front of these wild people. Now I get it twisted up because I can't get him clearly into my head. "What I can do, though, is invite you to stay in good company and leave the confusion behind for a while," said the old man. He called into the trees. There appeared a girl, Etain. She looked so familiar with her shiny black hair and moss-green eyes. She wasn't even up to Dark's knee. When she looked at him and smiled, he knew there was no caution on earth that could stop him from taking the small golden chalice she offered her, or from swallowing its dangerous contents without a thought. "It's been on my mind to tell you of Matha," said the old man. He looked across the fire at Canan, who nodded. "You might have heard of him as an ancient, a very wise and powerful druid." Stark had not. "Would you put me in mind of him, and when he was but a lost lad, and the way he started his journey?" Dark then went to sit by the fire next to Canan. Warmth swept over him as he gave in, and all the darkness of the world disappeared. He stared into the flames as the old man's words started, describing a place, a cabin in a valley that he could see through the flames.